All right, thanks, Todd. And joining me now on the Theater People Guest Hotline, a guy who's got his pulse on the Ohio State football beat, a guy who knows all the ins and the outs when it comes to Buckeye football, and a guy who we felt it was only appropriate to bring in and talk about the upcoming NFL draft, because there are a few storylines when it comes to this year's draft and Ohio State football. And, of course, I'm talking about none other than 11 Warriors' very own Mr. Dan Hope. Dan, how we doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, appreciate you taking time out of your, I'm sure, very, very, very busy schedule to sit here and talk to us just for a couple of minutes about the upcoming draft. So a lot of storylines coming out here recently, the last few weeks, right? About Ohio State's, the Buckeye football players' chances. Certain ones, maybe not a whole lot of overly intriguing storylines. However, obviously there is one huge storyline that has been developing over the last several weeks, and that is, of course, about junior quarterback Justin Fields. So I want to get into it first, talk to you a little bit about Justin. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you went out and saw both of his pro days down there at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, correct?
I was not allowed to be in the building, unfortunately, due to COVID protocols. But I did.
Okay.
I did watch on TV, and based on everything that I heard from people who were there, he killed it in both his workouts, quite frankly.
So then why are we hearing all of this conjecture here lately, Dan, that he's slipping? I mean, even just a couple of days ago, Chris Sims comes out and says, he's going to be drafted the very last pick of the first round, which, of course, belongs to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have some quarterback that just won him a Super Bowl in Tom Brady. So everything that you've heard, everything you saw throughout the season, for the longest time it seemed like throughout the year, it was a 1A, 1B kind of conversation as far as who the best quarterbacks in college football were. Trevor Lawrence 1A, Justin Fields 1B. Then all of a sudden we get to the postseason, we start getting into pro days. Now all of a sudden we're hearing people coming out saying, well, I don't know, maybe Justin, and now they're hemming and hawing. Do you think that kind of conversation about Justin's play is warranted, or is it maybe some smoke and mirrors that we've also heard some former Ohio State players and other people come out and say that, well, this is just a tactic that they will use because they know how good the guy is, and they simply want others to buy into that conjecture so they can swoop him up at maybe a little bit later of a pick?
Well, first of all, I think there's absolutely zero chance Justin Fields is going to fall to the 32nd overall pick of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that's just ridiculous. I mean, could he slide a little bit on Thursday night? Sure. I mean, you never know exactly what's going to happen in one of these drafts, and the reality is this is an unusually top-heavy quarterback class, and that there are 5 quarterbacks who are legitimate top 10 pick type players. And I think, that's the thing that I think, people shouldn't lose sight of, is that, if it's me, I mean, I'm right there with you. I think Justin Fields is one of the top 2 players in this draft, along with Trevor Lawrence. I think he should be one of the first 2 players drafted. I think the fact that he's probably not going to be is surprising to me. And I think there's a very good chance that the teams that pass on him will regret it. But at the same time, we're talking about Zach Wilson, and we're talking about Mac Jones, and we're talking about Trey Lance. I mean, we're talking about 3 really good quarterbacks here. I mean, these are all 5 of these guys have the potential to be really good NFL quarterbacks. So in terms of, those guys going ahead of Justin Fields, if that happens, while it's surprising to me because, to me, Justin checks every box you could ask for, I also don't look at it and go, well, there has to be some, controversial reason why Justin's falling. Maybe teams just think, this guy's better. But, in terms of, do I agree with, this idea that, Justin's not this surefire top prospect? I don't, because to me, watching him play for the last 2 years at Ohio State, I mean, I think he's the best quarterback Ohio State has ever had. I really do. And I think, you just look at, for one, his physical traits. I mean, he's got, it's almost like if a quarterback was created in a lab with, his arm strength and his physical ability. I mean, to me, he's got all the physical traits you want at that position. And then when you hear some of this stuff about, mental makeup and work ethic and all that, I mean, to me, most of that just does not jive with anything I'd ever heard about him during his Ohio State career. I mean, you talk to anybody at Ohio State, they will tell you that Justin Fields was an incredibly hard worker, that he was the leader of their team last season, and that he's a guy who has a really high football IQ. So are there things that he is going to have to work on once he gets to the NFL in order to succeed at the next level? Absolutely. But there's nothing to me that I see with Justin Fields that makes me think this is some huge red flag. This is some reason why he can't be successful at the next level. I think as long as he continues to work as hard as he has at Ohio State, I think he has all the tools needed to be a great NFL quarterback.
Now, and so that's one thing that I saw as well out of him the last 2 years was, you say he checks all the intangibles, he checks off all the boxes. To me, I'm wanting a guy who not only has a super strong arm, which I remember after Dwayne Haskins left, and then the spring game there of 2019 when Justin was coming in, and some of the wide receivers were being interviewed by, the members of the media. They were saying then that Justin had, in no disrespect to Dwayne, but that Justin just had that stronger arm than Dwayne. He had just a harder snap to his throw. And you combine that with the kind of speed that we've seen Justin exhibit. I mean, the guy not only can throw a mile, throw it hard, but he's also got the wheels to elude defenders and at times run that read option and take it into the house. So I'm with you on that one, that I just don't understand where people are seeing the attributes that Justin Fields possesses and why they're kind of being down on him. And I guess I that's why I say, is it this smoke and mirrors thing that maybe other GMs or other scouts or whomever it is trying to psych out, other GMs into making a decision that, they may regret later. And that's why I don't get, honestly, Zach Wilson, great year at BYU, but you look at his overall career at BYU, and it's really 1 year. That's really all he had, was really one good year. And then all of a sudden we get Trey Lance coming into the picture here from FCS North Dakota. And it's kind of like, well, where is this coming from all of a sudden? It just seems to be a little bit of a head scratcher to me, and I'm sure a lot of people out there in Buckeye Nation, especially those of us that saw Justin Fields and what he was capable of doing.
Yeah, and to me, you mentioned Dwayne. I mean, to me, I think Justin is at a different level as a prospect from Dwayne. And I say that while also saying that 2 years ago, I thought Dwayne Haskins was going to be a great NFL quarterback. I thought Dwayne Haskins should have been drafted higher than he was. And so far, that has not been the case. So, I don't want this to be revisionist history here and say that I, predicted that Dwayne would struggle in the NFL. I didn't. I'm still curious to see if he can succeed in a new setting in the NFL. But I just think, the big thing, you mentioned it, for one, the athleticism of Justin Fields.
Yeah.
That's something that Dwayne Haskins did not have. And truly, I mean, that's one area, like if you're looking for one tangible area in which you can say out of all these quarterbacks, Justin Fields is at the top of the list. I mean, none of these other guys run a 4.40. So right there, Justin Fields is the most athletic quarterback in this draft. And if you look at the NFL in recent years, you look at guys like Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson and Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray. Most of the top quarterbacks in the NFL nowadays are guys who can really move. Tom Brady has defied logic with how great he has been. But for the most part, the top quarterbacks in the NFL today are guys who are great athletes. So I think that's one big thing that Justin Fields has going for him. And then, like you mentioned, I mean, the arm strength is there and the accuracy is there. Once in a while I'll hear something, somebody will say, Justin needs to work on his accuracy. And when I hear that, to me, like, that's the first tell that this person did not actually watch Ohio State play for the last 2 years, because accuracy was never a problem for Justin Fields. I mean, he has the ability to make every pro on the field. So, I mean, the thing that we can't really speak to is what's going on in those interviews with NFL teams. And maybe Mac Jones and Trey Lance really are impressing NFL teams more in the interview room than Justin Fields. But like you said, in terms of a smoke and mirrors, this is the time of year where it's like you almost have to choose what to believe and what not to believe, because some of the stuff out there is legitimate and some of it is absolutely stuff that's being fabricated by teams that are hoping a guy will fall to them. So, I mean, I think most of it that's out there is really not, it's just not true. It's just stuff that's, being floated out there trying to create a narrative about Justin Fields that isn't true, based on anyone I've talked to at Ohio State.
So when you look at this draft, who's in need of a quarterback, who might take him on a flyer kind of thing, where do you see Justin going? Who's the best fit for him? And if he does start to fall a little bit, what's the basement as far as your belief, and truly he shouldn't fall any further than at least a certain spot in the draft?
Yes, I mean, my answer would have been San Francisco at number 3 would have been the perfect fit for him, but it doesn't sound like that's the direction San Francisco is going to go. So, when I look at the potential slots, look at, Atlanta at number 4, that's a possibility. I mean, he's a hometown guy there in Georgia. Matt Ryan's 36 years old. They could draft him as their quarterback of the future. I'm going to guess that doesn't happen because Matt Ryan is still under contract for a couple more years. So I'm going to guess that doesn't happen, but I don't rule it out. Then you start to look into that later in the top 10 area. You've got Carolina at number 8. They traded for Sam Darnold, but it has been rumored that they do really like Justin Fields. So if he's there, maybe they consider it. You look at Denver at number 9. I think that's one that would make a lot of sense. Drew Lock has not been great in his first 2 years in Denver, so I think they could certainly be looking to upgrade at quarterback on Thursday night. But the team that really jumps out at me as the team that would be the perfect fit for Justin would be the New England Patriots. And they're at that number 15 overall pick. And I think they probably have to move up to get him. I think they probably have to move up to like pick 7 if they're going to get Justin Fields. But if you look at, where they're at, Cam Newton on a 1-year contract, but they need that quarterback of a future. They had Tom Brady for all these years, but now if they're going to get back to that level, they need that quarterback of a future. There's rumors that the Patriots really like him. So that's the team that I keep going back to is the team that would make a lot of sense for Justin Fields. And in terms of a floor, to me, the Patriots at 15, that's the floor. I mean, I would be shocked if Justin Fields fell to 15 and the Patriots did not draft him. I would be stunned.
Well, and that's one of the things I've seen here within the last couple of days is that the Patriots are taking a real interest in him, and they're looking to possibly trade up just so they can secure, drafting him. If he's going to have success at the next level, do you think him being on a team that has an immediate need for a quarterback where they just throw him out there to the wolves, throw him into the fire immediately, is a way for him to succeed? Or bringing him in and, let's say, sitting him there in Atlanta a couple of years behind Matt Ryan, or even bring him in for one season to sit behind a Cam Newton, something like that? What's the best route you think of success for Justin Fields at the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure there's really a right or wrong answer in terms of one of those clearly being better than the other. I think really the most important thing is just in terms of a fit, in terms of the offense that he goes to, the team that he goes to, the team that's structured around it. Because I think sometimes you see a guy where he goes to a team where he gets thrown into the wolves and maybe, things are unstable in that organization, and then things really go poorly, and then, they just never recover. I don't necessarily think that, him playing immediately would be a bad thing, because, you look at a Justin Herbert last year. I mean, he was a guy that I would have thought a year ago, maybe he's a guy that needs a year to develop, and then he goes out there and he does great. So, to me, I don't necessarily view Justin Fields as this guy who needs a year to develop. I know there's people who think that. To me, watching him play at Ohio State, I think he's a guy who could go in and have success right away as a rookie. But at the same time, I think if you go to a spot that has a veteran quarterback where you could groom him for a year, I don't think that would hurt him. Because, I mean, you look at a Patrick Mahomes, you look at an Aaron Rodgers. Those are examples of guys who were drafted into situations like that, and clearly it worked out for them. So I think, if you were to, let's say in New England, and let's say that they decided to start Cam Newton this year, and he was to, learn from Cam this year and then take over in 2022. Same thing like in Atlanta, if he was to learn behind Matt Ryan for a year and then take over, I think that could be a very good situation for him.
Let's switch gears just for this next talking point, because I want to get your opinion on really the other intriguing storyline to me. Maybe not to other people in Buckeye Nation, but to me, I'm really intrigued about Shaun Wade. Now, I know you have talked with him, a bit here in the offseason. And here's a guy that had an opportunity, Dan, after last year to be a first-round draft pick. Instead, he shocks Buckeye Nation, the NFL community, maybe college football, maybe the whole world in general, just shocks everybody and says he's coming back to play in a scarlet and gray uniform for one more year. And then things maybe didn't work out as well as we would have hoped and liked to have seen out of Shaun Wade, although it seemed like at the end of the season there, he began picking up steam. So tell us a little bit about the conversations that you had with Shaun, maybe how he felt this past season went. Did he have any regrets about not going to the draft after 2019, and where he sees himself as far as going into this year's upcoming draft?
Yeah, he has consistently told me that he has no regrets about coming back for 2020. That he wanted another chance to beat Clemson. He wanted another chance to chase a national championship. He achieved one of those goals. Came up a little bit short in the national championship game, but he has told me time and time again that he does not regret that decision. That he wanted to come back for the team, and he wanted to do that for the team, and finish out his career, as a Buckeye, and, get his degree as well, was something he did this past summer. So, those are all things that were important to him. One thing that, he has talked to me about was that he was hurt this past season, that he had a groin injury going into the season that required surgery. And then he was battling a turf toe for most of the season. And, he didn't miss any games. He decided to play through those injuries all year long. But,
wow.
Obviously, he was not playing at his best. So I think now, if you're an NFL team, the question that you're going to be asking is, okay, how much of this poor play was because the guy was hurt, and how much of it was just because, he didn't have that smooth transition to outside cornerback? And from my perspective, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean,
yeah.
You look at a guy, when he made that decision a year ago, he had no idea that COVID-19 was going to, wrap the season, because, he's trying to play a new position he hadn't played in his entire Ohio State career. Then he loses 3 full months of the off season where everybody's at home, and, he gets hurt. So he loses even more time even when they're back. And so, you just add up all these factors, and it kind of starts to make sense why things didn't go the way he had hoped they would go at outside cornerback. So I think, that's one thing that, if you're making a sales pitch to an NFL team for Shaun Wade, is that, he didn't really have quite the opportunity he should have had to show he could play that outside cornerback position. Now, with that being said, I think it's undeniable that, his draft stock has taken a hit over the past year, because, there was that talk about him being maybe a first-round pick going into this year. And, I definitely don't think that's going to happen on Thursday night. I think somewhere between, the second round into, the fourth round is what we're going to be looking at for Shaun Wade. But, I think the one other thing that, it is important to recognize is that we don't necessarily know that Shaun Wade would have been a first-round pick if he entered the draft last year. That was what some people thought. But I know that there were, people who were more connected to NFL scouts who, what they were hearing last year is that Shaun was, probably a second or third round kind of guy, and that, he needed to show that he could play outside cornerback if he was going to be that first-round pick. And I mean, this year that really didn't happen. So that's why, we're talking about a guy who's probably going to be a third or fourth-round pick on Friday or Saturday. But, I think, there's a big combination of factors here. I think, there's going to be that narrative if he falls in the draft of, he lost all this money by opting back in. And I think that might be partially true, but I don't think it's necessarily the full story.
Who is a possible sneaky kind of second or third rounder, or a guy that maybe, either fans in Buckeye Nation or just in, the NFL in general, some people out there that maybe aren't looking at some current Buckeyes that could kind of sneak in and be that kind of like, whoa, okay, wasn't expecting that kind of pick?
Yeah, I think Pete Werner is the first guy that comes to mind.
Okay.
Jim Nagy, who's the executive director of the Senior Bowl, was on SportsCenter on Sunday, and he's a former NFL scout, so he has a lot of connections. And he actually said that there are teams that have a late first-round grade on Pete Werner. So,
wow.
My guess is he will go in the second round. But I do think he's a guy. He's a guy that I kind of felt his whole Ohio State career was not as appreciated by Ohio State fans as he should have been. That I think, a lot of times, he was, the scapegoat when the defense played poorly, when I don't think that he deserved to be. And so I think there's going to be people who are surprised by how high Pete Werner goes on, I'm going to guess Friday night in probably the second round of the draft. Baron Browning's another guy that I think is definitely in that early round conversation just because of how physically gifted he is. He's another guy that, like, is there a slim chance that maybe he sneaks into that late first round? I don't rule it out, but I think second or third round is probably more likely for him. And then, another guy I'm really intrigued to see where he goes is Tommy Togiai, because I think Tommy has not gotten talked about as much as he should be in this draft process. And I think part of that was because he kind of surprised people when he declared. I think a lot of people were expecting him to come back for another year. So you haven't heard a lot of people talking about him as that, potential early round pick. But to me, he's a guy, you think about how strong he is and then how athletic he is for his size. I think he's a guy who's got everything you want in a nose tackle. So he's another guy that, it seems like most of the mocks have him as a third round pick right now. But if he, jumps up there in the second, that wouldn't surprise me.
One linebacker's name you didn't mention, and I think, unfortunately, at least me personally, I'm not sure if he's got an opportunity, at least maybe to get drafted, or if he does, it's going to be very, very late. Maybe, hopefully, he's got an opportunity to get picked up, free agent, and that's Tuff Borland. What do you think his chances are?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think, maybe a late round pick, but I think undrafted free agent is most likely for him. And I think, really that's just because of his speed. You look at the pro day, he ran a 4.98 in the 40, which, really for an NFL linebacker, especially in the modern game, is just not fast enough. No. So I think, NFL teams are going to have major questions about whether he's actually athletic enough to play in the NFL. But I do think he'll certainly, if he doesn't get drafted, I think he'll get picked up very quickly as a free agent. And if he makes a team, it wouldn't surprise me, because this is a guy who was a three-time captain at Ohio State. And I think very importantly for him, he was a guy that played a lot of special teams at Ohio State, because he's a guy, he's not going to be an NFL starter, but he's a guy that if he can make his bones on special teams, and then you combine that with the great leadership qualities he has, it definitely would not surprise me if he makes a roster and sticks around in the NFL for a while as a backup linebacker.
Yeah, he certainly had all of, the heart of a champion. I mean, just the absolute, ferocity of a tiger out there. I mean, after that Achilles injury, that really seemed to set him back, something that to me, it just appeared that he unfortunately never overcame.
Yeah, no, and I think, he's a guy that, was never that elite, athlete to begin with, and then you add in some of those factors. It certainly didn't help, but there's a lot of guys like that. It's so tough to make that jump from college to the NFL, and there's a lot of guys who are great college players who just don't, necessarily have those elite physical traits to play in the NFL. And I think he's a guy that's going to be right on the bubble there of whether he can actually play in the league.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. But, hey, we've got a big night here tonight, Dan. The draft is going to be happening here in mere hours. And I can't thank you enough, my good friend, for coming on here and taking a few minutes out of your busy day to talk a little bit about the upcoming draft and especially Ohio State football. And anything else that you have to say before we sign off here with you, my friend?
Yeah, I would just say, check out 11warriors.com for full coverage. I'll have posts up about every single draft pick that happens over the next 3 days in terms of Ohio State players. So if you're looking for coverage of Ohio State's NFL draft prospects, be sure to check out 11warriors.com or follow me on Twitter at Dan_Hope.
I don't think I could have said it any better myself as a way to sign off there, my friend. You just completely took all the words out of my mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, appearing on the Theater People Guest Hotline right here on the Score on Air Network pregame show for this upcoming NFL draft, the one and only Dan Hope of 11 Warriors. Absolutely. Go check him out because when it comes to Ohio State football, this guy, like I said, got his finger on the pulse of Buckeye football, and nobody knows more about it than that gentleman right there. So, Dan, thank you so much once again, and that'll do it for us. And, guys, back to you.